In the year 2045, after years of brutal warfare between the living and the undead, humanity had nearly been wiped from the face of the earth. Cities lay in ruins, forests had overgrown former battlefields, and the sky, once clear and bright, was a dim gray haze. The relentless wave of zombies had torn through every attempt at defense, overwhelming armies, governments, and nations alike. Yet, a small hope remained: the last fortress. Hidden deep within the mountains, the fortress was an incredible feat of engineering, built in secret by the world's greatest minds and the remnants of military forces. It was humanity's last stand, a place where survivors from across the globe had gathered in the hope of holding on to the faintest spark of civilization. Surrounded by a thick, unbreachable wall made of steel and concrete, the fortress stood like a beacon in the dark. Inside, the survivors had organized into a tight-knit society, doing whatever it took to ensure their survival. Food was rationed carefully, weapons and ammunition were stored in every corner, and every person had a role to play, whether it was in farming, research, or maintaining the defense systems. Among the survivors, there was one man who stood out: Commander Noah Grayson. Noah was a former military strategist who had been part of the Global Defense Coalition before it crumbled. After the last great battle that saw the fall of most of humanity's strongholds, he had been chosen to lead the survivors in the fortress. With his sharp mind and calm demeanor, he was the guiding force behind the fortress's defenses. He knew the battle against the undead was far from over; it was merely a waiting game. Despite the security of the fortress, life inside was far from peaceful. Tensions were high. The survivors were not just fighting the dead, they were fighting each other. Resources were scarce, and rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered about the real reason for the fortress's creation, that it was not just to survive but to prepare for the eventual fight for the world's future. The undead were not the only threat looming over the survivors. Noah stood on the lookout tower, staring out over the dense fog that covered the valley below. He had been there for hours, lost in thought, contemplating the next phase of humanity's survival. The silence around him was unnerving, a constant reminder of the endless horde that was always moving closer. It had been weeks since they had last seen a wave of zombies near the fortress. The undead had been unusually quiet, and Noah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. "Commander Grayson, we need to talk," came a voice from behind him. Turning, Noah saw Captain Lara Green, his second in command. She was a sharp, pragmatic woman with a no-nonsense attitude. Her dark hair was tied back in a tight ponytail, and her eyes, always scanning for threats, now held a look of urgency. "What's wrong?" Noah asked, his voice low. "We've received reports from the scouts. There's a massive horde moving in our direction. It's unlike anything we've seen before. They're not just wandering aimlessly, they're organized. There's something different about this group." Noah's heart sank. The last time they had encountered a horde this organized, it had been a trap. The zombies had adapted, learning how to swarm and coordinate with terrifying precision. If they were evolving, it could spell the end of the fortress. "I need a full briefing," Noah said, his mind racing. Lara nodded and handed him a tablet showing the latest scout data. The horde's movements were indeed strange, too coordinated, too deliberate. They weren't just aimlessly staggering, they were converging on the fortress from multiple directions. Something had changed, and Noah knew they needed to act fast. As he studied the data, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, a distant thud, followed by a series of loud crashes. It was faint, but enough to send a shiver down his spine. It was the unmistakable sound of an incoming assault. The undead were closing in. The last fortress was about to be tested. Noah took a deep breath, the weight of his responsibility bearing down on him. He was the last line of defense for the human race, and the coming battle would be the most critical yet. "Get the command center ready," he ordered, his voice firm. "We need to mobilize the forces now. If this is the beginning of something worse, we have to be prepared. We've spent too long building this place to lose it now." Lara nodded and rushed off to execute the orders. Noah remained at the tower, staring out into the fog, his mind swirling with the possibilities. He had always known that survival wouldn't be easy. But now, with the undead growing more intelligent, more dangerous, and closer than ever, Noah had to face the truth: humanity's final hope was about to be tested in ways they hadn't imagined. And in the distance, the undead gathered, ready for the first strike. The once peaceful fortress, now filled with the sounds of hurried footsteps and clanging metal, seemed to hold its breath. Inside the command center, lights flickered as the survivors scrambled to prepare for what could be their final stand. Commander Noah Grayson stood in front of a large map, tracing the movements of the Horde with his finger. His mind raced, every scenario playing out with terrifying clarity. "Are you sure it's them?" Noah asked, his voice tight. He wasn't asking Lara, he was asking himself. The undead had always been unpredictable, but this felt different. More calculated. Lara, who had returned from briefing the various defense teams, nodded gravely. "We've never seen anything like it. They're moving in synchronized waves, almost like they're being led by something. And it's not just zombies this time. We've had reports of them, changing. Some are faster. Some are smarter. It's like they're evolving." Noah clenched his fists. He had feared this moment for years, the day when humanity's greatest threat would not only be relentless but also more cunning than they had ever anticipated. The idea of an intelligent, organized horde sent a chill down his spine. But he couldn't show weakness, not now. Not with so much at stake. "Get the weapon systems online," Noah ordered. "We'll need every advantage we can get. Activate the drones. Keep an eye on the perimeter. We're not letting them get within a mile of these walls." As Lara left to carry out the orders, Noah turned to face the rest of the command team. A collection of engineers, military veterans, and former government officials, all who had survived the initial onslaught, now worked side by side to protect what little remained of humanity. There was an air of tension, but also of determination. These people had seen too much to give up now. A loud bang echoed from outside, followed by the distant sound of a siren. It was a signal that the Horde had been spotted at the outer limits of the fortress's perimeter. The scouts had confirmed that the zombies were nearing, and their numbers were greater than anyone had imagined. Noah's heart pounded in his chest as the lights inside the command center dimmed, signaling the transition to battle mode. The fortress, designed as a final bastion of hope, now hummed with energy, preparing for the most intense confrontation humanity had ever faced. Every soldier, technician, and volunteer moved with purpose, checking their gear, ensuring the barricades were secure, and making sure the walls were reinforced with every last resource they had. "Commander," Lara's voice crackled over the intercom, "we have a problem." Noah's stomach twisted. "What is it?" "The perimeter is holding, but the zombies are not stopping. It's like they're testing our defenses. There's a break in the eastern wall, but it's minor. We can patch it up if we get to it in time." "Patch it up? Fast," Noah said, his tone icy. "But don't risk too many lives. If they get in, we'll hold them off," Lara interrupted. "We've trained for this." Noah didn't respond. He wasn't so sure anymore. These zombies were different, faster, more dangerous. And they had something that set them apart: intelligence. They were adapting in ways Noah never thought possible. The sirens grew louder, signaling the encroaching threat. From the top of the fortress, Noah could see the first wave of zombies emerge from the fog. They were moving faster than normal, their eyes gleaming with an eerie intelligence, almost as if they were studying the fortress, finding weak points in their defenses. The front gates groaned as the impact of their attack rattled the steel. Noah could hear the distant shouts of soldiers on the outer wall as the Horde crashed into the gates, pounding against them with unrelenting force. The walls of the fortress, reinforced by decades of preparation, held strong for the moment. But Noah knew it was only a matter of time before the zombies found a way through. He looked at his team, his expression grim. We can't afford to wait for them to break through. We need to hit them hard, now. He turned to Lara. Deploy the drones. I want to know where the main group is heading. We'll target them from above. Lara nodded and tapped a few commands into her tablet, sending the signal to the fortress's drone fleet. The sky above the fortress was soon filled with small, humming drones, scanning the perimeter for any sign of the main force. Minutes passed in tense silence. Outside, the sounds of battle intensified as the zombies pressed harder against the walls, their bodies piled high against the fortifications. Inside, the survivors were readying for their last stand. Then, suddenly, an unexpected sight appeared on one of the drone screens, a massive figure, taller than any of the others, standing at the front of the horde. This was no ordinary zombie. The figure moved with purpose, its eyes glowing in the darkness as it watched the fortress from afar. What the hell is that? Lara whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Noah's blood ran cold. It was clear now, the zombies weren't just random, mindless creatures. They had a leader. And that leader was directing them, with terrifying precision. Humanity's worst nightmare had just become a reality. Noah gritted his teeth, his mind racing. Prepare the teams. It's time to fight back. Whatever they've got, we've got to hold the line. The battle for the last bastion of humanity was about to begin, and Noah had no intention of letting it fall without a fight. The fortress buzzed with activity as preparations reached their peak. The survivors were preparing for what could be their final stand. Inside the command center, Noah paced back and forth, his mind grappling with the unimaginable. The appearance of the monstrous figure leading the horde had shifted the battle's dynamic. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore, it was a fight for the future of humanity. On the monitor, Lara's face appeared as she continued to analyze the drone footage. "Commander," she said, her voice tense, "we've identified the leader of the horde. It's massive, almost human in its shape, but there's something off about it. It's not just faster, it's smarter." Noah's mind raced. Is it a mutation? Some kind of evolution? It's possible, Lara replied. It's leading the zombies with military precision, almost like it knows exactly what to do. It's not just the zombies who are organized, it's this creature too. We need to prepare for a coordinated assault. The realization hit Noah like a slap to the face. The horde wasn't just an uncontrolled swarm, they were being led. This wasn't an attack of mindless creatures anymore. This was strategic warfare. And the leader had figured out how to utilize the horde like an army. Noah stood still for a moment, staring at the map on the wall. It showed the approaching horde in various segments, each moving toward key points of the fortress. The leader was directing the zombies to target the fortress's weakest points, the places that could be compromised under pressure. Noah could already see the strategy unfolding. This wasn't just a brute force assault. This was a carefully planned siege. "We have to hold those weak points," Noah said, his voice unwavering despite the weight of the situation. "Lara, take command of the western defense. I'll handle the southern perimeter. If they breach the walls, we'll need to move fast to contain them." Lara nodded, her expression steely. She had been through hell before, but this was different. There was no room for error. As Noah left the command center, the atmosphere in the fortress felt heavier than ever. The survivors, though determined, were visibly nervous. This was the first time many of them had truly feared the zombies since they'd taken refuge in the fortress. They had always believed the walls would keep them safe, that humanity could endure as long as they had a stronghold. But now, the walls were under threat from something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. Outside, the wind howled as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, adding an eerie atmosphere to the already tense situation. The first wave of zombies was already closing in, their grotesque forms shuffling toward the gates. But Noah's focus was not on the approaching zombies, it was on the leader, the one who commanded them. Noah had seen countless battles, fought and bled for humanity's survival, but he had never faced an enemy like this. The undead had always been a mindless force of nature, something to be fought with brute strength and firepower. But now, the zombies were more organized, and their leader was unlike anything they had encountered. The idea of a zombie that could think, that could strategize, sent a shiver down his spine. He joined the team at the southern perimeter, where the wall had been reinforced with layers of steel and concrete. The survivors worked quickly, their hands steady despite the fear in their eyes. They were preparing for a breach, knowing that the zombies would strike at any moment. "Hold your positions." Noah barked as the soldiers took their places along the wall, each armed with high-powered rifles and flamethrowers. "When they breach, we fall back to the second line. We don't fight them head-on. We need to buy time." The first wave of zombies slammed against the southern gates, their moans echoing through the air. Noah's heart pounded as he watched the doors creak under the pressure. The walls shook with the impact of the zombies' relentless assault. The sound of metal screeching filled the air as the gates began to buckle. Noah's eyes narrowed. They were stronger than he'd anticipated. The breach was imminent. "Now!" Noah shouted. The soldiers opened fire, their bullets tearing into the first wave of zombies. The creatures staggered back momentarily, but their numbers were overwhelming. More and more of the undead piled up against the gates, pushing with an unnatural strength. Noah could feel the ground shake as the horde pressed forward. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the barrage of gunfire ceased. A loud crash echoed through the southern perimeter as the gates finally gave way, collapsing under the weight of the zombies. The first wave surged forward, entering the fortress with terrifying speed. "Fall back! Fall back!" Noah shouted. "Hold the second line." The soldiers scrambled, retreating to the next set of defenses, but the horde wasn't giving up. They pushed forward relentlessly, their claws scraping against the ground as they charged. Noah's mind raced. The leader of the zombies had to be somewhere close. He wasn't just a figurehead, he was coordinating this attack with deadly precision. But Noah couldn't afford to focus on him now. He had to contain the horde before it overran the fortress. From above, the sound of drones buzzed, providing a clear view of the battlefield. Through the fog of battle, Noah spotted the figure once again, the massive zombie leader, standing in the midst of the chaos, calmly watching the battle unfold. It was then that Noah realized the true scale of the threat. This wasn't just an attack. It was the beginning of the end. The southern perimeter had fallen, and the horde was flooding into the fortress with terrifying speed. The survivors, now retreating to the second line of defense, scrambled to regroup. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the acrid stench of the undead. Gunfire rang out continuously as soldiers fought back, but it was clear that the tide was beginning to shift. The zombies were relentless, and their leader, whoever or whatever he was guiding them with terrifying efficiency. Noah stood at the second line, surveying the chaos. The sound of the gates collapsing still echoed in his ears, and the air seemed charged with an eerie energy. The fortifications here were stronger, reinforced with layers of concrete and steel, but even these walls could not hold forever. The zombies were pushing forward, clawing at the barricades with relentless force, their eyes glowing with an intelligence that seemed almost human. "Commander, we can't hold them for long." Lara's voice crackled through the intercom, a mix of frustration and fear. She was at the western defense, coordinating the fight from her end, but it was becoming clear that every sector of the fortress was being overwhelmed. "I know," Noah replied, his voice tight with the weight of the situation. "We need to buy more time. The drones are still in the air, right?" "Yes, but the zombies are evolving. They're using the fog to shield themselves. We're losing visibility." Noah cursed under his breath. He had hoped the drones would provide the edge they needed, but now even technology was failing them. The fog, thick and unnatural, seemed to have a life of its own, wrapping itself around the fortress like a suffocating cloak. It was as though the land itself was conspiring against them, and the creatures leading the charge were aware of every weakness. "Move to Plan B," Noah said. "Activate the secondary defenses. I'll be on the front lines. We can't wait any longer." He turned to the soldiers, their faces grim but determined. "We hold this line or we die trying," he said. "No one gets through this barrier. Understood?" "Understood," they shouted in unison, a wave of resolve sweeping through the ranks. Noah ran toward the front lines, where the battle was already raging. The first line of defense had fallen, but the second line had to stand if they were going to have any chance of survival. As he reached the barricade, he could see the zombies pressing against it, their claws scraping against the steel. It was only a matter of time before they tore through. His heart raced as he looked for the leader, the hulking figure that seemed to direct the undead with chilling precision. He knew that if they could take out the leader, the horde might lose their direction and scatter. But the leader was nowhere in sight. Instead, there was something far worse, a series of shrieks from the perimeter that sent a chill down his spine. "What's happening?" Noah demanded, tapping his comms. "They're coming from above," Lara's voice came through, filled with panic. "The zombies are climbing." Noah's blood ran cold. The horde had adapted once again. They weren't just mindless monsters, they were evolving, learning how to use the environment to their advantage. They had learned how to scale the walls, and now they were pouring over the sides like a tidal wave. "Deploy the snipers," Noah ordered. "Get them on the rooftops, now." As snipers took their positions, Noah turned to the soldiers manning the barricades. "Hold the line. Don't let a single one through. We can't let them get past us." The battle grew fiercer by the minute. Zombies were scaling the walls, dropping into the inner courtyard like an unstoppable flood. The soldiers fired relentlessly, their weapons echoing in the chaos. But even as the zombies were shot down, more kept coming, climbing over the bodies of their fallen comrades, showing no signs of fear or hesitation. Noah fought alongside his men, rallying them, encouraging them to keep pushing forward. But it was clear that this wasn't just about holding the line anymore, it was about surviving long enough to find a way to defeat the leader. Suddenly, a loud crash rang out as a massive figure dropped down from the roof. The zombie leader had appeared, his presence felt like a weight in the air. He was even more terrifying up close, taller than the average human, with pale, weathered skin and glowing eyes that flickered like fire. He was surrounded by a pack of faster, more agile zombies, each one moving with precision, as though they were an extension of the leader's will. The leader raised a hand, and in an instant, the surrounding zombies halted their advance, as if awaiting further instructions. The sight was horrifying. These were not just mindless creatures. They were organized. They were an army. Noah's mind raced. The leader was directing the horde from the front now, and with the zombies evolving at such an alarming rate, there was no telling what they were capable of next. "Focus fire on the leader," Noah shouted, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "Take him down, now." But it was too late. The leader raised his arm once more, and this time, the zombies obeyed with terrifying speed. They charged forward, slamming into the second line of defense with a fury that shattered the barricades. Noah's heart pounded as the fortress walls seemed to crumble around him. The zombies were inside. The battle was no longer about holding a line. It was about survival. The end had come. Chaos reigned inside the fortress as the first wave of zombies surged past the crumbling barricades, their eerie shrieks and guttural growls filling the air. Noah barely had time to react before he was caught in the thick of it, his weapon raised, firing at the creatures that now swarmed through every opening. The fortress, once their last hope, was now their battleground, an arena where the last remnants of humanity would fight to survive. The leader's presence was unmistakable. Standing taller than any zombie Noah had ever seen, the creature moved with unnatural grace, directing his army with precision. Every step it took seemed deliberate, every action calculated. It wasn't just a beast, it was something more, a commander of the undead with a mind that was as lethal as its body. The zombies, once thought to be mere cannon fodder, were now a highly trained force, following every command without question. Noah fought through the melee, pushing forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the crackle of gunfire all around him, but the more they fought back, the more the horde seemed to grow. Every time a group of zombies fell, another one appeared in its place, their grotesque faces twisted in grim determination. Fall back. Fall back to the inner sanctum. Lara's voice echoed in Noah's earpiece, urgency lacing every word. She had been on the western perimeter, but it was clear now that the whole fortress was being overrun. There was no more time to fight at the gates. The battle for the outer defenses had been lost. Noah looked around, his eyes scanning the battlefield for any sign of hope. The last stand had begun, but it wasn't just about fighting now, it was about making sure the survivors had a chance to escape. The inner sanctum was their final line of defense, the last place they could regroup and plan their next move. But Noah knew the reality: unless they could stop the leader, there was no escape. He turned back toward the direction of the courtyard, where the leader stood, watching the battle unfold. There was no mistaking the creature's intelligence now. It was orchestrating the destruction, calculating each move, every step. This wasn't just an attack, it was a war, and they were losing. The leader raised a hand once more, and the zombies halted in their tracks, waiting for his next command. It was as though the very air around them shifted. The zombies, for the first time, were still, silent. Noah's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment. He couldn't let the leader consolidate control. If the zombies stopped moving, then it meant the leader was preparing something far worse. We need to hit him now. Noah shouted, rallying the few survivors who were still standing. A handful of soldiers responded, pushing forward, their weapons ready. They had no choice but to make their move now, or the entire fortress would fall. The leader stood at the center of the courtyard, flanked by several of his most deadly followers, fast, intelligent, and terrifyingly coordinated. Noah signaled to Lara through the comms. We're going for the leader. We need air support, now. We've lost contact with the drones, Lara replied, her voice grim. The fog's too thick. You're on your own. Noah swore under his breath. There was no more help coming. It was up to them, and only them. Focus fire on the leader. Noah yelled, and the soldiers opened fire. The gunshots echoed through the courtyard, the sound of rapid-fire rifles ringing in the air. The leader stood motionless, almost as if he were waiting for them to make their move. And then, as if responding to the attack, the leader raised his hand, and the zombies around him surged forward, faster than they ever had before. Noah barely had time to react as the first wave of zombies barreled toward them, claws outstretched and teeth bared. They were faster now, moving with military precision, avoiding bullets with uncanny agility. It was as though they knew the battlefield, anticipated every attack. Fall back. Noah shouted as the zombies closed in. The survivors began to retreat toward the inner sanctum, their guns blazing, but they were outnumbered and outpaced. For every zombie they shot down, two more appeared in their place, their relentless assault showing no signs of slowing down. Noah glanced back, searching for the leader. There he was, standing tall in the center of the courtyard, his glowing eyes fixed on Noah's position. The leader's hands moved in a slow, deliberate fashion as he commanded his army to advance once more. But this time, something was different. The zombies weren't just attacking, they were strategizing, working together as a unit. They were evolving before their very eyes. We can't hold them much longer, a soldier shouted, his voice trembling. Noah's mind raced. They were facing an enemy they couldn't defeat with brute force alone. The zombies had become too intelligent, too strategic. And if they couldn't stop the leader, there would be no more fight left to win. The realization hit Noah like a freight train: they weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the last shred of hope, the final thread of humanity's future. But with each passing second, that hope was slipping further and further away. The leader had already won, and now, the only question left was whether Noah and the survivors would be able to make one final stand before the world was lost to the undead forever. But they wouldn't give up. Not without a fight. The retreat to the inner sanctum was chaotic, the sounds of battle echoing through every corridor. The survivors moved in a panicked frenzy, but their steps were measured. They had been pushed back to their final line of defense, the last hope of humanity standing between the Horde and the last remnants of civilization. Noah led the charge, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. He had seen it in their eyes, the fear, the hopelessness. But there was no time for doubt now. Get those doors secured. Double the guard. Noah shouted to the soldiers who had made it through the chaos of the outer perimeter. There was no way they could hold the entire inner sanctum for long. They had to create barriers, anything to slow the Horde down long enough to find a solution. The inner sanctum, with its reinforced steel doors and thick concrete walls, was designed to withstand all but the most powerful of attacks. But it hadn't been designed to withstand an onslaught of intelligent, coordinated undead creatures. Even with its fortifications, the place was vulnerable. There was no telling how long it would hold. Noah turned to the few remaining survivors. Most were soldiers, but there were also civilians, engineers, and scientists. They had all come together for one purpose: survival. But even with their combined skills, they were no match for the unrelenting force of the zombies outside. How much time do we have? Lara's voice crackled in his earpiece, steady but tinged with urgency. Not much, Noah replied, his eyes scanning the room, seeking a solution that felt increasingly impossible. The zombies have adapted too quickly. They're not just mindless anymore. They're evolving, and that leader is at the center of it all. We need to find a way to take him down, or it's over. Lara fell silent for a moment, and Noah could hear the faint rustling of papers in the background. He knew she was thinking, calculating the possibilities in her mind. Lara had always been their strategist, the one who saw potential in places others would overlook. But even she was starting to sound uncertain. "We don't have the firepower to take him down directly," she said finally. "But I think there's another way. We have one option left." Noah felt a flicker of hope. "What's the plan?" "We need to disrupt their control. If we can break the leader's hold over the Horde, the zombies should lose their coordination. They'll revert to their mindless state." "And how do we do that?" Noah asked, his voice low, as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile thread of hope that had begun to form. "The control center," Lara said, her voice more confident now. "There's a facility beneath the sanctum. It houses an electromagnetic pulse generator. If we can trigger it, it should interfere with the leader's connection to the Horde. It's a long shot, but it's the only option we've got left." The plan was risky, so risky it might not even work. But Noah had no choice. The time for hesitation was long gone. If this was their last hope, they would take it, no matter the cost. "We'll need a team to go in," Noah said, turning to the group of survivors who had gathered in the inner sanctum. "I'm going." "Who's with me?" A few soldiers volunteered, their faces set in grim determination. They had all seen enough death to know that the fight wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming their future, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Noah nodded. "All right. Lara, keep us in contact. We'll need all the intel you can give us." Lara's voice came through again, this time tinged with urgency. "Be careful, Noah. The Horde's adapting faster than we anticipated. And I don't know if we'll have enough power to keep the EMP activated long enough to take down the leader." "We'll make it work," Noah said, though he knew the odds were slim. He had to believe that they could still make it out of this alive. He had to. The group of survivors, armed with as much ammunition as they could carry, set out for the facility beneath the sanctum. The walls were eerily silent now, the screams and gunfire from the outer perimeter nothing more than distant memories. It was almost as if the Horde had stopped moving, waiting. But Noah knew better. The zombies weren't waiting. They were adapting. As they descended into the depths of the sanctum, the air grew cold, the oppressive silence only broken by their footsteps. The tunnels beneath the fortress were dark, the flickering lights casting strange shadows along the walls. They moved quickly, their senses heightened, each step carrying them closer to the electromagnetic pulse generator. When they reached the control room, Noah's stomach sank. The door was already open, the dimly lit interior revealing the faint outline of the generator. But there was something else, something far worse. The leader's eyes glowed faintly in the shadows. He had found them. Noah's heart raced as the leader stepped forward, flanked by several of his most dangerous followers. It was clear now, the leader had anticipated their move. He had led them right into his trap. "Prepare to fight," Noah ordered, his voice tight with adrenaline. But it was too late. The battle for humanity's survival was no longer just a fight for the fortress. It was a fight for everything they had ever known. The room seemed to close in around them as the leader advanced, his monstrous form blocking the exit and casting a shadow over the survivors. His eyes burned with an otherworldly light, an eerie reflection of the dark power that controlled him and the Horde outside. For a brief moment, Noah thought he saw something human in the leader's gaze, but it was fleeting, quickly replaced by a cold, calculating malice that sent a chill down his spine. The survivors immediately raised their weapons, but Noah signaled for them to hold. No matter how many rounds they fired, it was clear that their bullets had little effect on the leader. His body had become too resilient, too monstrous. The leader wasn't just a zombie, he was something far worse, a perfect amalgamation of undead brutality and intelligence. The air in the room was thick with tension, and for the first time, Noah realized just how close they were to the end. The survivors were out of options. Their weapons were only good for fighting off the mindless Horde, not a leader who commanded them. "We need to trigger the EMP now," Lara's voice crackled through Noah's earpiece. "The generator's power is unstable, but it can still work. You've got one shot." Noah nodded grimly, turning his attention back to the leader. There was no way they could defeat him head-on, not in their current state. They had to find a way to disrupt his control over the Horde. The EMP was their only hope, but that meant getting past the leader and activating the generator. It seemed like an impossible task, suicide, even, but it was the only choice left. "Cover me," Noah said, his voice firm. With a single, decisive motion, he darted for the control panel that housed the EMP generator. The rest of the survivors fired their weapons at the leader, hoping to keep him distracted, but the leader didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on Noah, a knowing, almost smug expression on his face, as though he was aware of their plan. It was then that Noah realized, the leader had been expecting this all along. He knew they would try to use the EMP to defeat him. As Noah reached the control panel, he could feel the floor tremble beneath his feet. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the air heavier. The leader wasn't just standing still, he was drawing energy from the very space around them, feeding off the chaos and fear. The room felt suffocating, as though the air itself was being drained away by the presence of the leader. "Now!" Noah yelled. Lara's voice echoed through the earpiece again, this time with a sense of urgency. "You've got 30 seconds to activate the EMP. The leader will try to stop you. He's more than just flesh and bone. He's something else." Noah's fingers flew over the controls as he punched in the necessary sequence to activate the electromagnetic pulse. His mind raced, knowing that every second mattered. Outside, he could hear the faint growl of the Horde closing in, the sound of their footsteps growing louder. The zombies were closing in on the inner sanctum, their numbers seemingly endless. "Stay focused," Noah muttered under his breath, sweat beading on his forehead. "You can do this." He felt a sudden shift in the air, a pressure that felt unnatural. The leader moved, his body lurching forward with speed and precision. Noah barely had time to react before the leader was upon him, a monstrous hand grabbing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The grip was like iron, and the leader's eyes burned with a feral intensity. Noah gasped for breath, struggling to free himself. His hand moved to the weapon at his side, but it was no use. The leader was too powerful. Noah could feel his strength draining as the leader's grip tightened. It was only a matter of time before the life was squeezed out of him entirely. "You cannot stop this," the leader's voice echoed in Noah's mind, the words sounding like a command, a statement of certainty. "I am the future of this world. Your kind will fall, just as all others have." Noah's vision blurred as the air grew thin. But even as his consciousness flickered, a single thought surged through his mind: activate the EMP. He twisted in the leader's grip, pushing himself to reach the control panel once more. His fingers brushed the final button. His last ounce of strength surged forward as his hand slammed down on the activation switch. "Now," he gasped, as the EMP generator hummed to life. The world around him seemed to freeze as a powerful wave of energy spread outward from the generator. The leader's eyes widened in shock as the pulse of electromagnetic energy surged through the room, disrupting the undead connection that had given him control over the Horde. The monstrous figure dropped Noah to the ground, releasing his grip with an almost startled force. For a brief, deafening moment, nothing happened. Then, the energy burst erupted outward in a blinding flash. The lights in the room flickered and died. The silence that followed was crushing. Then, it was as though the entire world had reset. The leader staggered back, his form twitching as the pulse interfered with his control. His once lucid eyes now reflected confusion, and for the first time, he seemed vulnerable. His movements were slow, disoriented, like a creature who had lost its connection to its own mind. The zombies that had been under his command suddenly halted, their movements jerky and uncoordinated as they reverted to their mindless, chaotic state. It wasn't enough to end the battle, but it was enough to give Noah and the survivors a fighting chance. The leader had been neutralized, if only temporarily, and the Horde was now at a disadvantage. But for how long? How much time did they have before the zombies adapted again? Noah scrambled to his feet, gasping for breath, but he knew the truth: this was far from over. The final battle for humanity's survival had only just begun. Noah staggered to his feet, his head pounding from the force of the EMP's impact. His lungs burned from the lack of air, and his body felt as though it was made of stone. But despite the exhaustion, a fierce spark of hope ignited inside him. The leader, the one who had been their greatest threat, was no longer in control. The Horde had been thrown into chaos, their unified force shattered. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they had a chance. "Move!" Noah barked, pulling himself to his feet and taking a step toward the door. "We can't waste this opportunity." The survivors scrambled into action, moving swiftly and efficiently, each of them knowing that they had no time to lose. The leader may have been incapacitated for now, but Noah knew it wouldn't be long before he regained his bearings, or worse, the Horde adapted to the EMP's effects. They had to act fast. As Noah led the charge back toward the inner sanctum's exit, he noticed something strange. The once mighty fortress felt emptier than ever before. The walls seemed to close in, the dim light from their emergency torches casting long shadows down the hallway. The thrum of the EMP's pulse still lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the battle they had just fought. Behind him, the survivors followed close, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and fear. There were fewer of them now, many had fallen, sacrificed themselves in the initial fight with the Horde. But the ones who remained were stronger, forged in the fire of this endless war. "Check the perimeter," Noah called out. We don't know how long this will last. The soldiers fanned out, weapons at the ready, scanning every corner and doorway for any signs of movement. The silence was unnerving. Before the EMP, the Horde had been an unstoppable tide, relentlessly pounding at the fortress gates. Now, it was as if they had disappeared, leaving only the broken remnants of their assault. But Noah knew better than to let his guard down. The Horde didn't just vanish. They were regrouping, adapting, planning their next move. And if the leader regained control, everything they had fought for would be lost. Status report, Noah called to Lara, who was monitoring the situation from the control room's communication center. The Horde's disorganized, but we've detected movement in the outer sectors, Lara responded, her voice tight with urgency. They're slowly beginning to regroup. We've got a limited window to get out of here. Noah's mind raced as he processed the information. They had two choices: stay and try to hold the sanctuary, or break through the Horde and escape while they still had the chance. Both options were dangerous, but Noah didn't hesitate. They were too vulnerable now, too exposed. Everyone, listen up. Noah's voice cut through the air, commanding attention. We make a run for the secondary exit. If we stay here any longer, we're dead. Move fast, and don't stop for anything. With no time to waste, they moved as one, a well-coordinated unit working together toward the secondary exit. The hum of their weapons, the soft shuffle of boots on the cold concrete, and the low murmur of their breathing filled the hallway as they advanced, the tension palpable. Each step forward was a gamble, every corner could hold another ambush, every doorway a new nightmare. As they reached the final corridor, Noah's heart skipped a beat. The doors to the secondary exit were wide open, but they were not alone. Figures moved in the shadows, silent and still, their eyes glowing with that same unsettling light that had once belonged to the leader. Zombies. But these weren't mindless creatures, they were coordinated, intelligent. The leader's influence had spread further than Noah had thought. No! Noah shouted. Fall back. But it was too late. The zombies closed in from both sides, their movements unnervingly fast. Noah had no choice. He couldn't let them get to the survivors. Without hesitation, he drew his sidearm and fired, the shots echoing down the hallway, but the creatures kept coming. The bullets struck them, but they didn't fall. Instead, the zombies moved faster, more aggressively, their eyes never leaving the survivors. Noah, one of the soldiers yelled, panic rising in their voice. Keep moving. Noah shouted, his voice raw with urgency. We have to push through. With a collective cry, the survivors surged forward, weapons blazing as they fought their way through the Horde. But every step was harder, every inch of ground more precious than the last. The zombies were relentless, adapting faster than they could keep up. And in the distance, Noah could see the flicker of the leader's form, his presence like a shadow over them all. Just as it seemed the survivors were about to be overwhelmed, the unexpected happened. A sudden explosion rang out, shaking the very walls of the corridor. The ground trembled beneath their feet as a massive blast sent the zombies reeling backward. The leader's grip on the Horde was momentarily broken as the shockwave swept through the space. The survivors didn't hesitate. They sprinted for the exit, the sound of gunfire and explosions fading behind them as they plunged into the night beyond the fortress walls. The moment they emerged into the open air, it felt like a rebirth. The night sky, once dark and oppressive, seemed to promise something new, something hopeful. But the battle was far from over. The world outside the fortress had changed, and the fight for humanity's survival had only just begun. Noah looked back at the crumbling fortress, a grim resolve settling over him. They had won this battle. But there were still more to fight. The final fortress had fallen, but humanity's last stand was only beginning.